Morning has come, arise and greet the day. Dance with joy and sing a song of gladness. The light of hope it shines upon each face. May it bring faith to guide our journey home. A new day dawns, once more the gift is given. Wonder fills this moment shared together. The light of peace here shines upon each face. May it bring faith to guide our journey home. Open our eyes to see that life abounds. Open hearts to welcome it among us. The light of love here shines upon each face. May it bring faith to guide our journey home.
Good morning and welcome to Live Oak Unitarian Universalist Church. I'm Reverend Joanna. So glad that you could be with us here today. And if this is your first time joining us, a special welcome going out to you. After the service, I invite you to go to liveoakuu.org. You're going to find lots of information about this church. I especially want to point out to you, go to the What's Happening page, click on that. It's going to let you know some activities that are happening this next week. And on the home page, if you will click on the thing about our newsletter, you can sign up for that. It's a weekly email newsletter, and it is the definitive place to know everything that is happening at Live Oak. And a special reminder to the Live Oak members, today is our annual May meeting. We will be having that later today. You will be voting on things like a new slate of board officers, and there's some awesome people on that. Some stuff about our bylaws, some financial stuff, lots of fun. Be sure and be there. And now it is tradition in Unitarian Universalist congregations to light a chalice at the beginning of our worship services and other gatherings. So if you have a chalice or a candle near, or even if it is only the one in your heart, be prepared to light them now.
This is my song, O God of all the nations, a song of peace for lands afar and mine. This is my home, the country where my heart is. Here are my hopes, my dreams, my holy shrine. But other hearts in other lands are beating, with hopes and dreams as true and high as mine. My country's skies are bluer than the ocean, and sunlight beams on clover leaf and vine. But other lands have sunlight too and clover, and skies are everywhere as blue as mine. Oh, hear my song, thou God of all the nations, a song of peace for their land and for mine.
Good morning. My name is Carrie Krause. I'm the Director of Lifespan Faith Development here at Live Oak. It's good to see you here this morning. Today's big idea is called A Little Jar Labeled Freedom by Cynthia B. Johnson, and it can be found in the book, What If Nobody Forgave? Once upon a time, long, long ago, there was a creator who had a hobby of making planets. The creator took great pride in making each one different. One day she looked at a gap in the solar system and said, I think I'll make a planet to go over there. Let me think, how will I make this one? She sat and looked out into the vast reaches of swirling matter and thought long and hard about creating another planet in her collection. She had a very large closet in which she had rows and rows of shelves with little jars and envelopes on them. To begin, she took a large glass jar down from a shelf and started adding ingredients to her planet. A pinch of this, a little bit of that, in went daffodils and puppies and pizza. She added ladybugs and butterflies and fire ants just to make her planet interesting. She poured in lots of liquid from the jar marked oceans and seas, and from the jar marked clear lakes, and slowly poured in more liquid from the jar marked waterfalls. She smiled and added just a dash from the jar labeled mud puddles. She decided to shake in a sample from all of her boxes labeled human beings. And she combined people of all sizes and shapes and ages, many colors of skin and hair, many different kinds of noses, and many different interests and skills. Over all of the people, she sprinkled some powder called change, so that the people would change in size and age, interests and skill. That will make this new planet interesting, she mused. I'm glad I thought of this. She looked in the bin called moods and emotions, wondering whether she should add a little or a lot. She started with love, adding more than 2 cups. And then, with a mischievous smile, she closed her eyes and, reaching into the jar labeled miscellaneous, where there were bits and pieces of sadness and courage, loneliness and happiness, regret and hope, she shook some in. She shook in some schools and universities. She shook in some churches and temples so that people could come together to remember what is important in life. She added comfortable shoes and blue jeans and warm coats and bathing suits. And from her bottle called Smells, she dropped in a pinch of hyacinth, a pinch of just baked chocolate chip cookies, a pinch of freshly mowed grass, and, just to make it interesting, a pinch of skunk. She amused herself for days and days designing her new planet.
Finally, she was almost done. Almost. There was one more ingredient she wanted to add. She turned her closet upside down, looking for the one special jar that she remembered that she had, but she had never used before. Finally, she found it behind a jar named Kalamavda, whatever that is, and she carefully lifted down a little jar labeled Freedom. This time she read the description. The label said, "This compound will aid in the ability to make choices, to choose one thing instead of another thing. Use cautiously, because the choices made will have consequences." The creator smiled as she measured out twice the maximum recommended dosage. She said to herself, "This will make it especially interesting." She held the jar open in her hands, slowly turning it as she looked down into it. A soft chuckle rumbled out of her mouth and into the jar. A tear trickled down her cheek and into the jar also. She leaned over and blew in her warm breath. And then she screwed on the cover and flung the jar away into the star-speckled darkness. It landed just where she intended, about 93 million miles from her favorite sun. The creator watched her planet settle into its new home. She thought, what a nice piece of work. I hope they'll appreciate all the special things I did to make their planet interesting. And then she sat down with a good book, a bowl of popcorn, and some Kalamavda.
Live your life with arms wide open. Today on your skin. No one else can feel it for you. Only you can let it in. No one else can speak the words on your lips. Think yourself in words unspoken. Live your life with arms wide open. Today is where your book begins. Feel the rain on your skin. No one else can feel it for you. Only you can let it in. No one else can speak the words on your lips. Treat yourself in words unspoken. Live your life with arms wide open. Today is where your book begins. The rest is still unwritten. The rest is still unwritten. Oh.
Excerpt from a column in the Chicago Tribune by Steve Chapman. In the minds of many Americans, the coronavirus pandemic creates a huge danger to constitutional rights and personal freedom. These unhappy souls regard stay-at-home orders, business closures, and even mask mandates as unprecedented, intolerable assertions of government power. They want to go back to the old days when people were free to make their own choices on such matters. Among the critics is Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito, who decries previously unimaginable restrictions on individual liberty. White House advisor Scott Atlas responded to stricter rules in Michigan by tweeting, "The only way this stops is if people rise up." Senator Rand Paul claims that experts who endorse such measures are mainly bent on forcing public submission. Requiring Americans to take action to prevent the spread of a potentially deadly contagion is not an abridgment of freedom. It's a recognition of the boundaries of freedom. The old accurate adage says, "Your freedom to swing your arms ends where my nose begins." Taking risks with one's own health is an exercise of liberty, but exposing others to disease is a violation of their liberty. No one has the right to dump sewage on her neighbor's lawn, or to release cobras on a playground, or to torch a business to protest police brutality. Your control over your body extends to such matters as what you eat, what you drink, and whether you get a tattoo or piercing. It doesn't extend to actions that may harm or endanger others. The belief that the rules by their nature violate constitutional rights has no basis in law or history. In a landmark 1905 case, long before liberal judicial activism was a thing, the U.S. Supreme Court upheld Massachusetts' compulsory smallpox vaccination law. Quote, "Upon the principle of self-defense, of paramount necessity, a community has the right to protect itself against an epidemic of disease which threatens the safety of its members. The police power of a state must be held to embrace, at least, such reasonable regulations established directly by legislative enactments as will protect the public health and the public safety." Boundaries, based in guiding principles, deliberately chosen and articulated clearly and often, give us freedom. Boundaries equal freedom. That's not some kind of 1984 doublespeak. You can see it. Most recently, this past year, New Zealand gave us a perfect example of this. They were following the news coming out of Wuhan, and they kept up with all of the science about the COVID-19 virus. And so as soon as it came to New Zealand, they jumped into action. They closed their borders. They required all returning New Zealanders to self-quarantine for 2 weeks. They instituted a 4-stage alert system, and when they got to stage 4, they did a national lockdown, and they instituted widespread testing and contact tracing. These were some pretty strict boundaries. And because they did that, within just a relatively short period of time, people were then inside the country able to go about their normal business, having a level of freedom that the rest of the world hasn't been able to enjoy. They've kept up with all of that. I believe they had to go into lockdown another time when they started seeing cases rising. But as of today, during this entire period, there have been 26 deaths because of COVID-19 in the whole country. They established boundaries, and the people in their country within those boundaries had the freedom to more or less live their lives normally, and perhaps more importantly, the freedom to be alive. Boundaries based on guiding principles, chosen deliberately and articulated clearly and often, give us freedom. Healthy boundaries. Healthy boundaries are the ones that are based on our moral framework and our guiding principles. Healthy boundaries arise from our best thinking rather than coming out of us being reactive to our feelings, our anxiety. And you may have to choose between competing guiding principles in order to decide what some of those boundaries are going to be. Those are going to be some of the hardest decisions that we make, but they also have the potential to being some of the best because we're being very deliberate in thinking them through. And I imagine that practically everyone has faced this past year. You probably have some sort of a core value that is about you being in relationship and staying connected to your friends and your family. And you probably also have a pretty core value about not doing anything that would hurt them, that would put their lives at risk. And so you had to make a choice about which one of those you were going to prioritize. And you tried to use your best judgment with the amount of information that you had available. And then that probably led you to being more creative and coming up with other things. That happens a lot of times when we have two guiding principles that we have to choose between. We have to prioritize one. But then once we make that decision, we may come back to the other one that is still important, but we've put it at a little bit lesser priority. We come back to that one and say, okay, can I be creative? Are there other ways that I can live trying to fulfill that guiding principle? And we've seen that this year, right? That's what we're doing right now. We wanted to stay connected as a community. We did prioritize the health of our members first, and then we set to work to find out, okay, so how is it going to be that we stay connected during this time? Healthy boundaries are often best when they are about defining who we are as individuals or as a community, rather than establishing a boundary for our own protection. In the case of this church and COVID, yes, absolutely. One of the effects of this hopefully has been to protect us, but it was based in some core values of this church about seeing every single member as being important, from the youngest to the eldest. Every member of this community matters. And so we are still basing what we are doing in this kind of weird in-between time on that core value. And I think you also can see this in that example of New Zealand. See, in New Zealand, if you read about the country, trust is a huge part of their culture. It is one of their core values. And so as they were creating these policies and programs, it was to protect their citizens. And yet it was also arising out of the trust that is placed in their government and the trust that I think the government has that the people are going to support what they're laying out. And it looks like that trust was well founded. Over 80% of the citizens absolutely supported what New Zealand did. Healthy boundaries are based in guiding principles, and they are deliberately chosen. It's not something that's just left to chance. It doesn't happen accidentally. It's not a response to our feelings. Healthy boundaries are not just common sense. Now, these boundaries may be things that a lot of people would say are common sense, but again, they are deliberately chosen. Healthy boundaries are not walls, and they are not shibboleths. Do you know shibboleth? If you're a fan of West Wing, I imagine you've heard of this, or if you have studied the Hebrew Bible. The book of Judges tells the story when the people of Ephraim tried to invade Gilead. The Gileadites managed to fight back and win the battle. So then you had the Ephraimites who were still there and trying to sneak back to their own land, but they were captured. And so the people of Gilead questioned them, and the people from Ephraim said, "Oh no, we are Gileadites." And so then the people of Gilead said, "Oh, you are you? Okay, say the word shibboleth." But because the Ephraimites didn't have the SH sound in their vocabulary, they said sibboleth. And so then the people of Gilead knew that these people were not their tribe. So that's what a shibboleth is. It's a way of being able to determine who is in your tribe and who is not. A shibboleth is not a boundary because it's not a healthy boundary because it's not deliberately chosen. It happens by accident, it happens by assumption, it happens through culture. We got to admit it, like we have a lot of shibboleths. Shibboleths abound, many of them unconscious. And hopefully there are some that we can identify and we can make a choice about and say, oh, no, we want to be more inclusive than that. If someone walked into our church when we are back together having church, wearing a big cross and carrying a Bible, probably for most of us, something would be kind of triggered in our brains that would say, this person is not one of us. But if we're aware of that, then we can kind of put that on ice and get to know the person. And you know what? We may find that actually this person fits in quite well and is one of us. That's the thing about unhealthy boundaries that are not deliberately chosen. They can not only hurt the people whom we exclude, they can hurt us because we don't even realize that we are unwittingly offering that shibboleth. The effects of unhealthy, unchosen boundaries can be huge. Last week, I talked about the consolidation of the Unitarians and the Universalists and how really they should have gotten together way earlier. because they weren't separated by theology. They weren't separated by guiding principles. They were separated by culture. They were separated by shibboleths and prejudice, and I imagine that the majority of it was not chosen, and it certainly wasn't coming out of guiding principles. So I'm going to speak in some generalizations so we can understand this. You know what? First, let me actually talk about that whole issue of speaking in generalizations. It's something that when we do it, we need to be very clear in our own minds that we are doing it and what our purpose is, because generalizations by their very nature mean that we are going to lose individualism when we employ it as a tool. But it is a tool, and it is a valuable tool, because when we sort of back up to where we're not seeing individuals, but we are seeing groups, then we can see patterns. And when we can see patterns, then we can analyze patterns. That's my short sermon on generalizations. Now, moving back to the main sermon, speaking in generalizations, you had the Unitarians, and they were elite. They were extremely well educated from prestigious schools. They founded Harvard. They were often affluent, and they were usually urban. The Unitarians, at the start of this country, had significant institutional power. Heck, in Boston, the headquarters for the Unitarian Association was right next door to the State House. And many of our first presidents identified as Unitarians. They had power, and there was some power in being exclusive. The Universalist, again, speaking in generalizations, there certainly are exceptions to this, but the Universalist tended to be poorer, less educated, and if they were educated, it was perhaps not at a prestigious school. They were more rural, and they really wanted to reach out to everyone. They wanted to take their message to the masses. So while the Unitarians kind of enjoyed being exclusive, the Universalists not only wanted to be inclusive, but they actually became missionaries going into other states and trying to give everyone this good news that they were not damned to hell. Texas, in fact, used to be just full of Universalist churches because of these missionaries. I am brokenhearted at the missed opportunity. If the Unitarians and the Universalists had gotten over their pride, their prejudice, their shibboleths, their unchosen boundaries that were not based on guiding principles, if they had gotten past all of that, and in those early days combined, if you had had that missionary zeal and desire to grow from the Universalist, combined with the organizational power, the institutional connections that the Unitarians had, if you had combined those in the early days, just imagine how different the religion and this country might have been. Whenever we become exclusive, we sacrifice impact. We absolutely have to have boundaries in order to self-define and to have freedom within those boundaries. But we have to be very intent on making sure that those boundaries are based in guiding principles and deliberately chosen, not erected by accident. Thank you for being with us this morning. And a special thank you to everyone who helped be a part of this service and put this service together, our musicians, our producers, and you for bringing your presence to this gathering. A reminder again for our members that we are having our annual May meeting today, and also a reminder if you are new here to go to liveoakuu.org so you can learn more about us. May you go forward this week knowing that you are lovable and loved and looking for opportunities to move that love out into the world.
Soon the day will arise when we will be together, and no longer will we live in fear. And the children will smile without wondering whether on that day thunder clouds will appear. Wait and see what a world there can be if we share, if we care, you and me. Wait and see